I really hate to admit this, but I was wrong, sort of. I was scrolling for YouTube Shorts one day and I came across someone promoting the NP-FZ100 batteries, which are USB-C chargeable, branded by Smallrig. I left a comment on that video basically saying that I feel they don't perform as well as the Sony batteries. And then I received a response back where they basically stated their feedback saying that the third-party batteries actually outperform the Sony batteries themselves. That sounded quite strange to me, but also I've never actually formally tested it for myself. I was basically going off instinct and anecdotal data where I'm actually shooting this in the real world, but not actually testing it formally. And because this is the official Sony battery, I kind of just tend to have that feeling that it would actually be performing the best. I've accumulated many of these batteries over the years, mostly because when I'm buying and selling cameras, sometimes I buy a kit with multiple batteries within it. And then when I choose to sell on the camera, I usually hold some of the batteries back just because batteries are always handy to have. And on my part, when I'm reselling my camera in the used market, having an extra battery in there doesn't really impact the sell price. Usually speaking, when people are selling full kits like that, they're giving up their kit completely. But I still shoot Sony. I still have many other Sony cameras, so I tend to try and keep these batteries within my collection. Granted, only recently I realized how many batteries I have accumulated over this period of time. So my point in raising that part of the story is that I haven't actually needed to use these K&F batteries very regularly at all. To give context, I actually purchased this one here, which is a USB-C chargeable one, to use as a dummy battery for when I'm shooting long form education videos at work. To save the idea of having to switch the batteries out every so often, I've just decided to just run this up into the camera, leave the battery door open, plug in a USB-C cable into the battery, and it kind of just keeps it charged. Usually a full day's worth of recording, at the very end of the day, this is still holding at 70%, whilst it's taking charge and also draining it for the shoot itself. There have been a couple of times when there's a slightly loose connection on the USB-C cable and then it was just running purely off this battery, and I do find it doesn't last very long. And then for context, for this K&F battery just over here, I actually purchased it because I wanted the USB-C charger that came with it and not necessarily the batteries themselves. They were just a nice additional bonus, but I haven't really used these, just mostly because of the assumption that they wouldn't perform very well. I do use all three batteries at various situations, just whatever's most convenient in my bag, to be honest. And once more, just to reiterate, it was just a feeling that I had more confidence in the Sony just because they're the official manufacturer for that camera, for that battery, and so forth. But nonetheless, I have decided to do a test, and the results did show that I was wrong, sort of, as I said at the beginning of the video. But now let's just get to the results. So how I conducted the test was I ran it off the Sony FX30s that I have. I got 3 of them on the same firmware using the same SD card brand, all shooting the same exposure settings, manual focus, everything identical. All of them were connected through Wi-Fi through to my monitor control app on my iPad, just so I can keep an eye on the battery levels and so forth. And this is what I discovered through my testing. Now, just to cut to the chase and get to the results, the ones that actually performed the best were the Sony batteries, but here's where I was wrong, and they didn't actually perform that much better than the K&F batteries. All the FX30s were shooting at 4K 50p, and the one that had the Sony battery in there lasted up to 1 hour and 31 minutes at 4K 50. Whereas the K&F battery started dying out around 1 hour 21. I'll put the specific results on screen at the moment. But what I found interesting about that is that these K&F batteries are so much cheaper than the Sonys. So yes, the Sony ones are outperforming it, but it's not by much at all. I even repeated the test, switching out the batteries into the different bodies, everything else remaining identical, and I was getting very similar results, give or take 1 or 2 minutes. But what I say is quite the interesting thing about it is that when I was running the test and I was keeping an eye on the battery levels, the Sony battery was seemingly dying so much faster. At one point, it was registering a lower battery percentage than the other two very early on in the test. However, what I found is coming to the end of the test, the K&F battery seems to just drop suddenly. So the best way I can describe it is it just feels like the battery reading on the Sony battery was just a very steady decline. Whereas the K&F, they kind of like read the battery information incorrectly or inaccurately, where it seems to be holding on a much higher battery level and then just has a sudden drop off. Because like I said, the actual results of the batteries dying by the end of the videos was that the K&F batteries died probably like 10 minutes earlier than the Sonys. So I am wondering if people are seeing that the K&F batteries are outperforming the Sonys based off the fact that they're kind of going off the readings at the very beginning of the recording session, and they might be noticing that the Sony batteries are dying faster but not really running it all the way to the end. So what I will say is my conclusion to this test is that the K&F batteries actually perform much better than I realized. But through my own testing, the Sonys do actually perform better. Given that the official Sony NP-FZ100 battery is £65, whereas this K&F, which comes with an additional battery and a charger, and this only costs £54.99, this is an absolute steal. You could even get a triple pack with a triple charger, and that would only set you back £67.99. So £3 more, than the official Sony, and you get a charger and 2 additional batteries. This K&F battery with the USB-C charging on it is $65.99, so it's £1 more than the official, but then you can charge it directly into there. And to be honest, I don't feel this is a very good feature. Unless you need to run it as a dummy battery, I would actually encourage you just to go with these. The reason why is because that you actually have to charge through this USB-C charger. I do have the UPO tri-charge over here, and what I found with that is that when I actually plug this into here and I'm charging it, it shows that it's charging, but other batteries seem to fill up much quicker than it would through here. And then what I ended up finding out the other day is that I charged up through the USB-C directly into the battery and it charged much faster, and then I plugged it into the UPO and then it started discharging. So what I'll say is that if you get this USB-C charger, it's good to state if you're only going to be charging through here, but if you're going to start relying on other charging methods, I wouldn't recommend it. So me personally, I'm going to keep this battery in my bag because I use them as dummy batteries. And if I were to charge them, I'm only ever going to charge directly into the battery themselves, not through another charger. So just a headline recap, the Sony batteries do perform better from my testing, but at the cost savings that you would get from the K&F batteries, it's really hard to recommend the Sony over K&Fs. It's also largely depending on what you're shooting and how often you need to be charging and changing out your batteries. And especially if you're a hobbyist, you would definitely probably prefer the K&F batteries. But otherwise, let me know down below if you're generally happy with third party or if you typically want to stick to the official manufacturer. That's it from me. Cheers for watching.